There are moments in life when silence screams louder than words. You've been hurt, abandoned, discarded, and when you reach for answers, you're met with nothing but silence. The one who caused the wound vanishes behind a wall of cold detachment. But what if I told you their silence is not a sign of your weakness, but a reflection of their own fear? Let us journey together into understanding the purpose behind this behavior. Because when you understand the strategy of your enemy, you stop falling for their tactics. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is bondage. But knowledge is liberation. When someone you once trusted suddenly chooses silence, especially after causing you pain, it's tempting to believe it's an accident, a momentary lapse, or even a sign that maybe the relationship is on the mend. But let me make one thing clear. When a narcissist ignores you after hurting you, it is never by accident. Their silence is deliberate, intentional, and fully calculated. It is a strategic weapon they wield with precision, designed to serve their purpose. It is not a random act of neglect or indifference. This silence carries weight and meaning, and understanding that is the first step toward reclaiming your power. A narcissist world revolves around control. Their need to dominate your emotions, your thoughts, and even your reactions is paramount to maintaining the illusion of power and superiority they desperately crave. When they hurt you, they are testing the boundaries of that control, seeing how far they can push you, how deeply they can wound you. And when you respond, whether with anger, confusion, or tears, they feed off that reaction. It gives them fuel. But when you don't respond, when you seek answers or healing and they choose silence instead, that silence becomes their weapon of control. This is a form of psychological warfare, plain and simple. By ignoring you, they create a vacuum in your heart and mind. That vacuum is not empty, it is filled with uncertainty, doubt, and fear. Your mind races, trying to fill the silence with reasons, explanations, and justifications. You begin to question your worth, your actions, and even your sanity. This is exactly what the narcissist intends. Silence is their way of keeping you off balance, vulnerable and dependent on their presence, even if that presence is only marked by absence. When a narcissist goes silent after hurting you, they are also sending a very clear message. I am in control of when you have access to me. Their silence is a barrier they erect, a gate they close. They decide when or if that gate will open again. And in doing so, they reinforce the power dynamic where they are the gatekeeper and you are left waiting outside. It is a manipulation tactic that plays on your natural human desire for connection and closure. It is a way to keep you tied emotionally to them without any real engagement or reconciliation. Moreover, this silence is a shield against accountability. Narcissists have a profound fear of being held responsible for their actions. To admit wrongdoing would mean admitting weakness, and weakness is unacceptable to their inflated self-image. So instead of facing the hurt they caused, they choose to vanish. Ignoring you after causing pain is their way of avoiding the hard work of apology, repentance, or repair. It is easier for them to withdraw into silence than to confront the consequences of their behavior. This calculated withdrawal is also a form of punishment. It's a message that says, you are not worth my time or my energy. But beneath that message lies their own insecurity and fragility. They silence you because they fear your strength, your refusal to be broken, your refusal to beg for their attention. Your boundaries threaten their fragile ego, and silence is their weapon to try to dismantle those boundaries and regain dominance. It's critical to understand that this silence is not about you. It is about them. It is about their inability to face themselves honestly, to deal with the discomfort of guilt, and to engage in healthy communication. Their silence exposes their weakness, not your inadequacy. Many who experience this kind of silence after being hurt by a narcissist begin to internalize the blame. They replay conversations, analyze every detail, and torture themselves trying to figure out what went wrong. But in reality, the narcissist's silence is a tactic designed to keep you trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and confusion. They want you to feel unseen and unheard so that you become easier to control. Understanding that this silence is a strategy changes everything. When you know it's intentional, you stop taking it personally. You recognize that waiting for their explanation or apology may never come, and that's not a reflection of your worth. You gain the power to stop chasing after someone who is using silence as a weapon and instead focus on your own healing. When you see silence as a tool of control rather than a sign of your value, you begin to reclaim your narrative. You no longer allow their absence to define your reality. Instead, you choose to fill that space with your own voice, your own worth, and your own peace. This understanding also empowers you to set boundaries and to refuse to be manipulated by the void they create. You learn that silence does not equal rejection, it equals avoidance. And avoidance is not something you must accept or endure indefinitely. Ultimately, the narcissist's silence after hurting you is a reflection of their fear. Fear of being exposed, fear of losing control, fear of vulnerability. And when you see their silence for what it truly is, you no longer give it the power to wound you. You take back your life, your peace, and your dignity. So remember this: when a narcissist ignores you after hurting you, it is not a sign of your insignificance. It is a calculated move to maintain control and avoid responsibility. Your healing begins the moment you recognize their silence as a strategy, not a statement about your worth. You are more than their silence. You are more than their pain. You are a person worthy of respect, love, and honesty. And no silence, no matter how calculated, can ever change that truth. When a narcissist chooses to ignore you after they have hurt you, it is not a random act born out of indifference or forgetfulness. No, it is a deliberate, calculated action designed to keep you within their sphere of influence. The silence is not an absence, it is a presence, a powerful form of control that speaks volumes without uttering a single word. Understanding this requires a shift in perspective. Often when we are hurt by someone, our first instinct is to seek reconciliation, answers, or closure. We want to understand why the person who caused us pain suddenly turns away, leaving us in the shadows of confusion. But what if the silence itself is the answer? What if the act of ignoring is the very mechanism through which control is exerted? Control is the heartbeat of narcissism. Narcissists crave control because their fragile egos depend on it. They manipulate situations and people to ensure they remain the center of power. And when their words or actions injure you, ignoring you becomes their next step to tighten the grip of dominance. It's a strategy to remind you who holds the power in the relationship, the power to engage or to withdraw. When they ignore you, they create a vacuum of uncertainty. That vacuum is not accidental. It's a battlefield where your emotions become the territory for their control. In that silence, they expect you to chase them, to seek validation, to beg for attention. This is where control truly manifests, not in the words they speak, but in the void they create. They control your thoughts, your feelings, and your energy by withholding the simple act of acknowledgement. You may wonder, why silence? Why not confrontation or explanation? The answer is simple. Confrontation requires accountability, and explanation requires honesty, both of which narcissists desperately avoid. Ignoring you after hurting you is a tactic to evade responsibility. It keeps them above reproach and keeps you entangled in confusion. When a narcissist ignores you, they are saying without saying, I have the power to erase you from my world and there is nothing you can do about it. It's a reminder that they are in control of your access to their attention and by extension your emotional well-being. The withdrawal of their attention becomes a weapon, a form of emotional leverage designed to bend your will. This kind of control works because it triggers a natural human response, the desire for connection. As social beings, we crave communication, acknowledgement, and love. When these are suddenly withheld, it feels like a withdrawal of love and safety. Our minds race to find answers, our hearts ache for recognition, and our spirits struggle to maintain peace. The narcissist's silence becomes a chain that binds you to the hope of repair, to the illusion that if you try harder, if you wait longer, the silence will break. But in reality, the silence is the trap. The more you chase, the tighter the chains of control become. The narcissist's power grows as your hope dwindles. The control is not about reconciliation, it is about submission. To break free, it is essential to recognize that their silence is a message of control, not love or care. It is a weapon designed to make you dependent on their responses, to hold you hostage in the realm of uncertainty. When you begin to understand this, you stop reacting out of pain and start responding with wisdom. Imagine for a moment that the silence is not about you, but about them. It is their way of saying, I refuse to engage with my flaws. I refuse to face the consequences of my actions. I refuse to let you see the truth of who I am. Their ignoring is a shield to protect their fragile ego from the discomfort of accountability. Your strength lies in recognizing this truth. When they ignore you to maintain control, you can choose to reclaim your power by refusing to play their game. Instead of chasing their silence, you begin to affirm your own worth, independent of their validation. You learn to stand firm in your identity, knowing that your value is not determined by someone else's attention. Control loses its power when it is no longer effective. When you stop reacting, when you refuse to be manipulated by silence, the narcissist's control slips away. Their weapon becomes useless because it no longer triggers the response they seek. This is the path to freedom. Not by demanding explanations or chasing apologies, but by understanding the nature of the control and choosing not to participate in it. When you rise above their silence, you send a powerful message. You will not be controlled by absence or neglect. You are whole without their approval. Remember, the silence that a narcissist uses to control you is a reflection of their fear and insecurity. They fear losing the power they hold over you. They fear that your independence will expose their own weaknesses. But your liberation comes from embracing your own strength, your own voice, and your own peace. In this understanding lies your victory. The moment you see their silence for what it truly is, an attempt to maintain control, you become empowered. You no longer walk in confusion or doubt. You walk in clarity and confidence. So the next time you face the cold shoulder of someone who once hurt you, do not mistake their silence for disinterest. Know that it is a strategic move designed to hold you captive emotionally. But also know this, you hold the key to your freedom. You can choose to break the cycle by refusing to let silence dictate your worth. Walk in the power of this truth. Stand strong in the face of absence. And watch as the control they once wielded over you begins to crumble, replaced by your unwavering self-respect and peace. What many fail to understand when dealing with a narcissist is that their greatest fear is not that you will reject them, but that they will be held accountable for their actions. This is a crucial distinction because it reveals the core of their behavior and sheds light on why they often disappear or ignore you after causing harm. The narcissist's silence is not simply an emotional withdrawal or a sign of indifference. It is a deliberate escape from facing the consequences of their own choices and misdeeds. You see, accountability demands courage. It requires humility. It requires an admission of fault and a willingness to change. Narcissists are fundamentally afraid of this because their entire identity is built on a fragile foundation of pride, false self-worth, and a desperate need to be seen as perfect, powerful, and invulnerable. To be accountable means to tear down that facade, to expose their flaws and shortcomings, and to admit that they are not as superior or in control as they want the world to believe. When a narcissist hurts you, whether emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, they are often fully aware of the damage they have done. But instead of facing you and taking responsibility, they choose silence. This silence is a shield, a protective barrier they erect to avoid confrontation with their own conscience and with your rightful demand for answers. They ignore you not because they don't care, but precisely because they do not want to be forced into a place where they must answer for their actions. Accountability requires a level of honesty that narcissists find intolerable. It strips away their ability to manipulate and control the narrative. It threatens their ego, which is so delicate that even the smallest crack can cause it to shatter. So rather than face accountability, narcissists retreat into silence, hoping that by withdrawing, the issue will dissolve, the pain will be forgotten, and the responsibility will vanish. This avoidance of accountability is one of the reasons why the silent treatment is such a powerful tool in the narcissist's arsenal. It is a form of emotional blackmail. They use it to punish you for expecting them to act like a mature, responsible adult. By ignoring you, they create a power imbalance where you are left scrambling for closure, left to question your own worth and to wonder if you imagined the hurt in the first place. But here is the truth that must be spoken aloud. You are not the one who should feel uncertain or ashamed. The one who hurt you and then ignored you is the one running from a much deeper fear, the fear of facing themselves honestly and the fear of losing control. Accountability means surrendering their illusion of infallibility, and they are not willing to do that. In fact, narcissists often confuse rejection with accountability. They believe that if they admit fault, you will reject them. This misunderstanding leads them to flee rather than fight, to ignore rather than engage. But rejection is not what they truly fear. What they fear is being exposed as flawed and vulnerable. They fear the humility that accountability demands. And so their silence becomes a retreat from truth. You might ask, why can't they just admit their mistakes? Why can't they apologize and make things right? The answer lies in the very nature of narcissism. It is an ego-driven disorder that depends on maintaining a flawless self-image at all costs. To admit wrongdoing is to crumble that image, and for them, that is an unbearable defeat. Their fear of accountability explains why they often project blame onto others, including you. Instead of looking inward and recognizing their own faults, they accuse you of being the problem. They turn the tables and make you feel guilty for holding them responsible. This projection is another tactic to avoid the very thing they dread most. Understanding this dynamic empowers you. It frees you from the confusion and self-doubt that the narcissist's silence is designed to create. When you realize that their ignoring you is not about your worth or your actions, but about their own fear of accountability, you begin to reclaim your peace and your power. You learn not to internalize their silence as rejection or punishment. Instead, you see it for what it really is, a sign of their weakness, not your failure. You understand that their disappearance after hurting you is a form of emotional evasion, a cowardly act that says more about their character than about you. This knowledge also prepares you to set healthier boundaries. You begin to demand accountability in your relationships, not just with narcissists, but with everyone. You refuse to accept silence as an answer. You insist on clarity, on responsibility, and on respect. In the end, the narcissist's fear of accountability is a reflection of a much deeper brokenness within them. It is a tragic and painful condition that often leaves those around them wounded and confused. But it does not have to define your story. You are not responsible for their fear. You are not responsible for their silence. Your responsibility is to your own healing and growth, to stand firm in your truth, to refuse to be silenced or diminished by their avoidance, and to know that true strength comes from facing accountability yourself, even when it is difficult. So when a narcissist ignores you after hurting you, remember this: they are running from accountability, not from rejection. Their silence is a desperate attempt to avoid the consequences of their actions. But your life is not about them. It is about your journey toward freedom, self-respect, and wholeness. Embrace this truth and you will find that the silence no longer controls you. Instead, it becomes a moment of clarity, a signal that you are being called to rise above the manipulation, to heal from the pain, and to step into your destiny with wisdom and courage. When you stand strong, when you set boundaries, when you refuse to accept being diminished or controlled, you expose a truth that the narcissist fears more than anything: your strength. You see, a narcissist's entire existence depends on maintaining a facade of superiority, of invincibility, of control. Their ego is fragile, built on illusions and deception, and when faced with genuine strength, it begins to crack. They are masters of manipulation because they prey on weaknesses, the weaknesses they see in others, and often the weaknesses they refuse to confront in themselves. But your strength, your resolve, your refusal to be diminished is a mirror to them. It reveals what they lack. Your courage highlights their cowardice. Your integrity shines a light on their deceit, and that is intolerable to them. When you say no to the patterns of abuse, when you assert your worth, when you refuse to be silent in the face of mistreatment, you challenge the very foundation of their grandiose self-image. To a narcissist, you are not just a person, you are a threat. You threaten their control. You threaten their illusion of perfection. You threaten their narrative that they are entitled to dominate others without consequence. This is why they respond with silence or indifference. It is not because they are indifferent to you, but because your strength unsettles them. It makes them uncomfortable. It threatens to bring down the kingdom of lies they have built around themselves. In their mind, if they were to acknowledge your strength, it would mean admitting their own weakness. And admitting weakness, that is something their ego cannot bear. Their silence after hurting you is a reflection of this struggle within them. It is a defense mechanism. By ignoring you, they try to reclaim a sense of control. But make no mistake, this silence is a sign of fear, not power. It is a sign that your strength has broken through their defenses, that you have refused to be a pawn in their game, and that you will no longer allow their actions to define your worth. Your strength strips away their ability to manipulate your emotions. It takes away the power they hope to wield over your mind and heart. When you stand firm, you create a boundary they cannot cross. You show them that their tactics, whether they are words, actions, or silence, will not break you. This is why the strongest response to a narcissist's hurt and subsequent silence is not anger or desperation, but calm, confident self-respect. It is the realization that their refusal to engage is not about you, but about their inability to handle your truth. They would rather disappear than face a reality where you are whole, healed, and unshakable. It is important to understand that your strength is not just resistance, it is transformation. When you cultivate your inner strength, you transform the pain they inflicted into power. You reclaim your narrative. You rewrite the story not as a victim, but as a victor. Remember, strength is not about confrontation or loudness. It is about self-awareness, integrity, and peace within. It is the ability to remain centered even when others try to pull you into chaos. When you embody this kind of strength, silence from a narcissist cannot harm you. It becomes meaningless noise against the backdrop of your steadfast spirit. And here is a profound truth. Your strength inspires others. By refusing to be diminished, you teach those around you the power of dignity and self-worth. You break the cycle of abuse and manipulation. You become a beacon of hope to those still trapped in the shadows of toxic relationships. Do not underestimate the power you hold simply by standing in your truth. When a narcissist ignores you after hurting you, it is because your strength shines too brightly. It exposes their shadows. It calls them to accountability in a way they are unwilling or unable to meet. And that in itself is victory. So nurture your strength daily. Build it with knowledge, self-love, and purposeful boundaries. Protect it with wisdom and grace. And never allow anyone's inability to handle your strength to make you question your value. Their fear is their burden, not yours. Your strength is your freedom. Your strength is your shield. And your strength is the unshakable foundation on which you will build a life of dignity, peace, and true empowerment. When someone chooses to hurt you and then deliberately ignores you, what you are experiencing is not mere silence. It is a calculated form of psychological warfare, a tactic designed to confuse, destabilize, and control you. This is important to understand because once you see it for what it truly is, you no longer become its victim but its conqueror. The silent treatment is more than just the absence of words. It is a weapon wielded with precision by those who seek to manipulate your emotions and your sense of self. The silence is not neutral. It carries a weight, a message, a demand. It screams without sound. It says, "You are not worthy of my attention. You are insignificant. You do not exist in my world." But this message is a lie, and it is meant to deceive you. You must understand that when a narcissist or any toxic person uses silence after hurting you, they are engaging in what psychologists call emotional withholding. They withdraw not only their words, but their validation, their recognition, and their emotional presence. This withdrawal is designed to leave you feeling isolated, confused, and desperate for answers. It is an attempt to destabilize your inner foundation. Why? Because your sense of security, your emotional health, your very identity often depend on connection and communication with those around you. When that connection is severed abruptly and without explanation, it leaves a void, a vacuum that your mind will rush to fill. This vacuum becomes fertile ground for self-doubt, fear, and anxiety. The silence forces you to ask questions you cannot answer. Did I do something wrong? Am I not enough? Why am I being punished with silence? These questions chip away at your confidence and self-worth. This is exactly what the silent treatment is meant to do. It is psychological warfare because it targets the most vulnerable part of the human experience, our need to be seen, heard, and valued. The absence of communication is a form of punishment without words, a rejection that is meant to make you feel small and powerless. But here is the critical truth that you must grasp. The silent treatment reveals more about the person using it than it does about you. When someone refuses to engage, refuses to explain, refuses to acknowledge your pain, it exposes their own incapacity to handle conflict, responsibility, and emotional honesty. It is not your failure that drives the silence, but their fear and weakness. Those who use silence as a weapon want to control your reaction. They want to keep you in a state of emotional limbo, constantly wondering and worrying. They want you to seek their approval, to break down and beg for their attention. This control is not about reconciliation. It is about domination. It is about power. In this warfare, your response is your greatest weapon. If you interpret the silence as shame or fault, you give away your power. You allow their tactics to work on you. You let their silence become a prison that confines your mind and spirit. But if you recognize the silence for what it is, a desperate attempt to avoid accountability and a sign of their own brokenness, you break free from its grip. You refuse to chase after their approval. You stop trying to fill the void with explanations or self-blame. You understand that their silence says nothing about your worth, but everything about their inability to face truth. Remember, silence can be deafening, but it cannot speak the truth. You do not need their words to confirm your value or your healing. Their refusal to communicate is their own defeat. You can rise above this psychological warfare by anchoring yourself in truth and self-awareness. When you know who you are and what you deserve, the silence no longer frightens you. Instead, it becomes an opportunity to build your inner strength. You fill that vacuum not with confusion, but with faith in your identity and your future. The silence of the narcissist or abuser is their retreat, not your failure. It is their way of running from confrontation, not your way of losing your place in this world. The battle they wage through silence is a test of your resilience. And when you refuse to be shaken by it, when you refuse to crumble in its absence, you demonstrate a power far greater than theirs, the power to stand firm, to heal, and to walk away with dignity. So do not allow the silence to speak lies into your heart. Do not permit it to dictate your emotions or your self-worth. Recognize the silent treatment for what it truly is, a form of psychological warfare designed to manipulate you. And then reject its hold. Rise above it. Respond with clarity, with courage, and with the conviction that your value is not diminished by their refusal to see it. In the end, silence is not absence. It is presence waiting for your awareness to expose it. Your liberation begins the moment you see the silence as the tactic it is and refuse to be moved by it. That is when you reclaim your power, restore your peace, and become the victor in a battle that was never about your defeat. When a narcissist ignores you after hurting you, it is not just a simple act of turning away. There is a deeper, more complex psychological process unfolding beneath the surface, one rooted in fear and avoidance. What they are doing is projecting their own guilt outward, like a shadow cast far away from themselves, so they do not have to face the heavy burden of responsibility. This projection is not an innocent or accidental behavior. It is a deliberate self-preserving mechanism that narcissists use to escape the reality of their wrongdoings. To understand this, we must first recognize the nature of guilt. Guilt is a powerful, uncomfortable feeling that arises when a person is aware that they have caused harm or done wrong. For most healthy individuals, guilt prompts reflection, repentance, and ultimately growth. It leads to accountability, the willingness to admit mistakes and seek to make things right. But for a narcissist, guilt is a threat to their carefully constructed self-image. Their identity depends on appearing flawless, superior, and invulnerable. Accepting guilt would mean acknowledging a fault, a crack in their armor, and this is a risk they refuse to take. Instead, the narcissist chooses to push this guilt away, projecting it onto you. When they ignore you, they are essentially saying you are the one at fault, without using words. The silence, the cold shoulder, the emotional abandonment, all become a form of accusation. They invert the truth and make you feel responsible for their distance and pain. This is not a coincidence. It is a tactic of psychological manipulation. The projection of guilt is rooted in what psychologists call defense mechanisms. These are unconscious strategies people use to protect themselves from uncomfortable truths. In the narcissist's mind, admitting guilt would shatter their grandiose self-image. So they project that guilt onto the very person they harmed. By doing so, they deflect responsibility and create a narrative where they remain the victim and you become the offender. This projection serves multiple purposes. First, it shields the narcissist from the internal turmoil that guilt causes. By externalizing the blame, they avoid facing their own shortcomings and mistakes. Second, it destabilizes you emotionally. When someone who hurt you suddenly ignores you without explanation, you may find yourself desperately trying to understand why, questioning your actions, doubting your worth. This confusion plays into their hands because it keeps you off balance and more likely to seek their approval or reconciliation on their terms. Moreover, this projection erodes your sense of reality. It plants seeds of doubt about your own perceptions and feelings. You may begin to internalize the unspoken accusation that somehow you caused the silence, that you deserve the hurt. This is a dangerous psychological trap. When you accept responsibility for someone else's wrongdoing, you lose sight of your own value and truth. But the truth stands firm regardless of the narcissist's tactics. You are not to blame for their guilt or their silence. Their refusal to own their mistakes is a reflection of their brokenness, not your worthiness. Recognizing the projection of guilt is the first step toward freedom. When you understand that their ignoring you is a way to avoid responsibility, you stop accepting the false narrative they impose. You begin to see their silence not as a punishment for you, but as an escape for them. This realization empowers you to reclaim your self-respect and set healthy boundaries. It's important to remember that projection is a sign of weakness, not strength. It shows that the narcissist cannot bear the weight of their own conscience. In their world, vulnerability is dangerous, so they hide behind blame and silence. But you, on the other hand, have the strength to face the truth, to embrace accountability, and to heal. In many ways, the narcissist's projection of guilt is a call for help disguised as aggression. They are running from the parts of themselves they cannot accept. This does not excuse their behavior, but it invites compassion for their brokenness while firmly protecting your own well-being. Your healing comes when you refuse to carry their guilt as your own burden. You can choose to see their silence as their problem, not yours. You can respond with clarity instead of confusion, with confidence instead of self-doubt. When you step into this mindset, you break the cycle of manipulation. You no longer wait for their acknowledgement or apology because your peace does not depend on their accountability. It depends on your understanding. No one else's inability to take responsibility should define your self-worth. Their silence is their choice. Your healing is your power. In conclusion, the narcissist's act of ignoring you after hurting you is often a mask for the projection of their guilt. This projection is a desperate defense to avoid responsibility. When you grasp this truth, you see their behavior for what it truly is, a reflection of their fear, not your failure. Stand firm in your truth, recognize the projection. Reclaim your peace, because your value is not diminished by their silence or their guilt. It remains steadfast, unshaken, and worthy of honor. When a narcissist chooses to ignore you after they have hurt you, this silence is never an innocent or random act. It is not simply the absence of communication. Rather, it is a deliberate act of separation, a withdrawal that carries a hidden agenda. This act of separating themselves from you is not designed to give you space or healing. No, it is a weapon wrapped in the guise of distance. It is a strategy to control, to dominate, and to manipulate your very soul. You see, in the natural order of things, separation is supposed to be healthy. Sometimes when conflict arises, time apart can bring clarity, healing, and renewal. But what happens when that separation is not mutual? What happens when it is used to punish, to silence, to erase your value? This is where the narcissist's deception is exposed and where you must become wise. The narcissist's withdrawal is a calculated move. They create distance not because they want peace, but because they want power. By refusing to engage, by turning away and refusing to acknowledge you, they force you into a position of vulnerability. You are left to wrestle with unanswered questions, with a heart full of pain and confusion, and with a spirit that aches for resolution that will never come. This is psychological warfare disguised as separation. It is the misuse of disconnection. And make no mistake, it is manipulation. When they separate themselves from you, they are sending a message without words. It is a silent message that says, "You are not worth my time." But behind this silence lies a different truth. They are afraid of what will happen if they stay. They are afraid that you will expose their flaws, confront their lies, or demand accountability. So instead of facing the storm, they create a desert, a barren space where nothing grows except doubt and pain. This desert is the trap. It is the emotional wilderness where many become lost, wandering in search of answers that will never come. It is here that the narcissist exerts control by leaving you suspended in uncertainty, waiting for something that will not be given. This waiting is a tool. It's a form of dominance that forces you to chase after them, to beg for their attention, or worse, to believe that you caused the separation. But listen carefully. The narcissist's silence does not define your worth. Their absence does not erase your value. What you are experiencing is a twisted use of separation, a manipulation that tries to convince you that you are less than you are, that you are unworthy of love, respect, or even simple communication. This is why it is so critical to understand the nature of this manipulation. If you do not see it for what it is, you will fall into the trap of believing their silence is your fault, that you must change, plead, or diminish yourself to be noticed again. This is a lie crafted by the narcissist to keep you under their control, to keep you tethered to their emotional whims, even when they refuse to engage. True separation, the kind that heals, allows both parties space to grow and to reflect. But the narcissist version of separation is a weaponized silence designed to keep you off balance and dependent on their eventual return. Moreover, this separation becomes a deceptive form of dominance because it flips the script on who holds the power. At first glance, it seems that by walking away, the narcissist is surrendering power. But in reality, they are claiming it. They control your thoughts, your emotions, and your reactions by controlling the flow of communication. They decide when, if ever, you receive their attention or acknowledgement. This control over your emotional access is their victory. This is why so many who have been hurt by narcissists feel trapped by their silence. They do not realize that the true power lies not with the one who ignores, but with the one who refuses to be controlled by that silence. You see, dominance is not about who speaks the loudest or who is physically present. It is about who controls the narrative and the emotional atmosphere. When a narcissist uses separation as manipulation, they are attempting to control your narrative by silencing your voice. They want to rewrite your story by forcing you into isolation and doubt. But you must stand firm in the truth of your identity and your worth. You must refuse to let their absence define your reality. There is a way out of this trap. The key is recognizing this separation for what it truly is, a manipulation, and refusing to give it power over you. When you see their silence as a tactic rather than a truth, you reclaim your strength. You stop chasing the phantom of their attention and begin to invest in your own healing and growth. Your power lies in your response, in how you choose to interpret this disconnection. If you allow it to make you feel less than, you empower the narcissist's manipulation. But if you understand it as a reflection of their weakness and cowardice, you free yourself from its chains. Separation, when misused as manipulation, is a deceptive form of dominance, yes, but it is also a sign of the narcissist's deepest insecurity. It reveals their inability to engage with truth, their unwillingness to face responsibility, and their fear of losing control. When you walk away from the need for their acknowledgement, you strip them of that control. Let their silence be your signal, not to beg or to break, but to rise and to shine even brighter. You are not bound by their absence, you are liberated by your understanding. Disconnection is not your defeat, it is their admission that they cannot sustain a relationship built on truth and respect. Remember this always: the misuse of separation as a weapon is the language of the weak, the frightened, and the insecure. The strong, the mature, and the whole do not wield distance as a sword to wound. They communicate, they confront, they heal. You have the power to choose which side you will be on. Will you be the one trapped in the wilderness of silence, or will you be the one who walks boldly into the light of your own worth? The choice is yours. The moment you realize a narcissist has ignored you after causing you pain is a crossroads, a pivotal point where your future emotional freedom is decided not by their actions, but by your response. This is a profound truth that many overlook. The way you interpret and respond to the silence of a narcissist determines whether you remain bound or become free. You see, the silence is not merely the absence of words, it is an emotional space charged with intention. The narcissist wants you to feel rejected, confused, and diminished. Their goal is to shake your confidence, to cloud your clarity, and to make you question your worth. But what if I told you the silence has no power over you except the power you give it? The first step toward liberation is understanding this principle. Your perception is your power. If you perceive the silence as a reflection of your inadequacy, you remain trapped in a prison of self-doubt. You replay every interaction, searching for faults that might have caused their withdrawal. This is the path many take, unknowingly handing over their peace and joy to a person who does not deserve such authority over their soul. But if you choose to see the silence differently as a reflection of their character, not yours, you begin to reclaim your power. You understand that their ignoring you is not a measure of your value, but a symptom of their incapacity to face truth, accountability, and genuine connection. This is a powerful shift in perspective. It changes your internal narrative from "I am broken" to "they are broken." Your response to this silence can be a declaration of freedom or a surrender to captivity. You can respond with desperation, begging for explanations, chasing their attention, and lowering your standards in hopes of restoring a fractured relationship. This is what the narcissist expects, and it keeps you tethered to their emotional manipulation. It is a form of bondage because your peace depends on their unpredictable behavior. Or you can respond with dignity, with the understanding that their silence says nothing about your worth but everything about their flaws. You can refuse to chase shadows and instead focus on rebuilding your own spirit. This choice requires courage and faith. A faith in yourself, and if you believe, a faith in a higher justice and healing force that sees beyond human failings. The path to liberation through your response also demands that you embrace the power of boundaries. Narcissists thrive in blurred lines and undefined limits. When they ignore you after causing hurt, it is a test. Will you allow them to walk all over you again, or will you stand firm in your personal dignity? Setting boundaries is a profound act of self-respect. It communicates that you will no longer accept behavior that diminishes you. And when you set those boundaries, the silence loses its grip because it no longer manipulates your choices or emotions. Moreover, your response must include self-reflection and healing. It is tempting to focus on why they did what they did, to analyze their psychology, or to wait for their apology. But true freedom comes when you shift the focus inward toward understanding your own worth apart from anyone else's approval. Healing is not waiting for them to come back and say sorry. Healing is learning to stand whole, even when they are silent. The silence of a narcissist can also be a spiritual challenge, a call to deeper self-awareness and personal growth. When you choose to respond with strength, patience, and wisdom, you develop resilience. You grow into a person who no longer fears abandonment or rejection, because your identity is rooted in something far greater than their approval. You become the master of your own emotional state, not a victim of their games. It's important to recognize that liberation does not mean forgetting or excusing what happened. It means that you no longer allow their behavior to define your reality or dictate your emotions. You acknowledge the pain, you process it, and then you release it. This is not weakness, but a demonstration of profound strength. Your response also shapes your future relationships. When you refuse to let their silence imprison you, you send a message to yourself and to others. You are worthy of respect. You will not tolerate emotional neglect. This empowers you to build healthier connections based on mutual care, honesty, and accountability. Lastly, liberation through your response is a testament to your growth. It is a declaration that you will not be a victim, but a victor. The narcissist's silence is a test of your spirit, and how you respond writes the story of your healing journey. You can choose bitterness, anger, and despair, or you can choose peace, forgiveness, and empowerment. Remember, the power lies not in the hands of the one who ignores you, but in the hands of the one who refuses to be silenced by their actions. Your response determines your liberation, and in that liberation you find your true self whole, free, and unshakable.